From Quito, Ecuador, my name is Carla Gonzalez, and this is From the South, the evening news brief on Telesur English. And we begin this new edition right now. The 6th Cuba-CARICOM summit has been taking place in Antigua and Barbuda, with climate change at the top of the agenda, along with trade, agriculture, and other areas of cooperation. The Secretary General of CARICOM, Rivera Larroque, and Prime Minister Gaston Brown welcomed Cuba's Raúl Castro to the meeting. Brown said that the Caribbean faces many challenges, especially after this year's hurricanes, but that it has also great opportunities, and that the friendship with Cuba is an important part of this.
The Cuba-CARICOM relationship is one of the region's greatest assets. It has been an anchor in a turbulent global world, bringing mutual benefit across a broad spectrum of areas. While Cuba has earnestly sought to address its own developmental challenges, it has devoted resources beyond its borders to tackle human development gaps in the wider region. Cuba has helped to make our individual societies more resilient through its provision of access to world-class healthcare services, training and quality education, as well as assistance for disaster management, agriculture, and sports. For our part, we, the CARICOM countries, have not hesitated to stand up and to be counted in the effort to end the economic, commercial, and financial blockade which the United States government has imposed on Cuba for over 5 decades.
President Raúl Castro commended Prime Minister Brown on hosting this meeting, even after the devastation left by Hurricane Irma. He welcomed agreements between Cuba and CARICOM on disaster management and social development. And he said unity was more important than ever to demand a fair deal from the rich countries.
We should harmonize our positions to demand from the industrial countries fair actions conducive to the mitigation of and adaptation to the effects of climate change, especially in terms of financial resources and technology transfer. Additionally, we should coordinate our position with a view to the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, particularly to put up a united front, enabling us to resist the domination mechanisms imposed by the unjust international financial system. At this point, I reaffirm Cuba's steadfast position to support, under any circumstances, the right of the small island states and developing nations to receive a special and differentiated treatment concerning access to commerce and investments.
At the closing press conference, CARICOM's Secretary General, Rivera Larroque, summed up the benefits of the relationship with Cuba.
There will be different areas of collaboration. It's a framework, memorandum of understanding that will allow for further elaboration of agreements in terms of human resource development, training, planning, coordination among the meteorological services of our respective countries. So it's a framework agreement that elaborates a number of potential areas for which we're going to further elaborate some agreements. But already there's very close collaboration between SEDEMA and the civil defense of Cuba, and similarly between the civil defense of Cuba and many of our member states. This only seeks to put on a document what is already happening and to seek to advance it further.
We spoke earlier to Garfield Burford, the head of the news ABS TV and radio, and asked him what the importance of this meeting was.
Significant meeting because it is raising matters such as of regional and global importance, including climate change, adaptation and disaster risk management. These are key, absolutely, for your global audiences, because these matters have touched on both Cuba as well as members of the Caribbean community, CARICOM. During the past hurricane season, which ended just a few days ago, we had Hurricanes Irma and Maria, which devastated parts of, as you said, Barbuda, here in Antigua and Barbuda. One of the islands here was totally devastated by Hurricane Irma. There was also Dominica, which was devastated by Hurricane Maria. And both those hurricanes caused cause significant damage in Cuba as well. So this is a matter of common interest and importance for both Cuba and the Caribbean community. So these issues will be given significant focus during these talks. In addition, at the end of the discussions today, there will be a memorandum of understanding which will be signed between the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, SEDEMA, and Cuba's Agency for Civil Defense, and that will provide opportunities for closer collaboration, especially following the devastating hurricanes that we had in this September. So, of course, apart from climate change, there will also be issues of greater cooperation and collaboration on trade and other areas of technical cooperation. So significant issues being discussed at this forum. Plus, of course, they will also be looking at some matters which are not necessarily on the agenda, but emerging matters which have come up, such as what has happened with President Trump's recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital, as well as Brexit negotiations as well.
We now go to Venezuela, where reporting restrictions have come into effect 2 days ahead of Sunday's local elections. The candidates closed their campaigns on Thursday, as laid down by the National Electoral Council. National and international mediators said that the country's electoral system is safe and reliable. 50 representatives of the Latin America Electoral Experts Council will be present during the process.
We have carried out this process in the middle of threats and attacks by those who don't believe in the vote as a tool to reduce political differences. Their attacks have been directed not only to the electoral institution, but also to electoral officials who have experienced the ambition of few people to take power at any cost.
This is a process where the hand of man doesn't interfere at any time. Just to write down his vote and verify the machine has accomplished his will. Subsequently, the minutes of the ballots and the transmission of the results are all automated, and the computer system is audited.
The Venezuelan electoral system is one of the best in the world because it's one of the most audited, and this is a guarantee for Venezuelan people who go to electoral centers knowing their vote counts and cannot be manipulated by absolutely anyone.
The Venezuelan Foreign Minister Jorge Arreaza has met with these experts and welcomed any observation they might have on the process. Our correspondent Freddie Gillingham brings us more details from Caracas.
So with less than 2 days to go until Venezuela's mayoral elections are set to be taking place, the last finishing touches of the logistics of that election are all being put in place here. The technology electoral teams are being deployed. They will be joined by international specialists who arrived here earlier this week, who are set to be deployed to the 23 states across the country today. We actually joined the international specialists here at the Foreign Ministry building in downtown Caracas, where they are currently being addressed by Jorge Arreaza. His speech is obviously centered on welcoming the group who have come from all over the world. He's also given a bit of background information on the political situation in the country and why a democratic process is needed in light of an increasingly undemocratic opposition who have, of course, boycotted this vote. He urged the international specialists to come out and talk to people on Sunday, as obviously they're the most important people in this election, and he welcomed any criticism they may have to feed back to the foreign minister himself.
That was Freddie Gillingham from Caracas. We come back with more news in a minute. Stay with us. In Bolivia, President Evo Morales has urged the Secretary General of the Organization of American States, Luis Almagro, to respond for the fraud in the recent Honduran presidential elections. Through his Twitter account, Morales said, "Evidence has shown a flagrant fraud in the presidential elections in Honduras. The coup-monger Almagro tries to wash his hands and protect the benefactors of the dictatorship. He must respond to the Honduran people for the consequences of covering up this scam." The Honduran electoral authorities are recounting 4,000 voting tallies, as suggested by observers from the OAS, but they have not accepted yet the opposition's demand for a total recount. The country is still living under curfew, with over 500 people detained, 50 wounded, and 14 dead. More in this report.
Curfew starts at 8 p.m. At the time, in most parts of the neighborhoods and areas, residents are organizing to make noise and protest against the restrictive order from current president and candidate Juan Orlando Hernández.
What really motivates me is the fraud that happened in this country. We know the fraud that they did with the Social Security. That was theft. We're being fooled.
We're here because of the fraud that the Supreme Electoral Court is doing to the Honduran people. David Matamoros is going to be judged by history.
Residents from low-income neighborhoods know there will be repression and arrests, but they say there's worse things than that.
No, we are not afraid at all. We are afraid to be governed by people like him who want to remain in power without being elected by the people.
The government justified the curfew, saying it's necessary to avoid deaths and riots, but violence got worse after the first night of the curfew.
The responsibility of the military police, of the investigation headquarters, the national police and any other type of police that participates in these detentions and repression is a criminal act, and it's also violating human rights.
For human rights defenders, the government's strategy to inflict terror to the population through the military, who fire on the protesters even inside their own neighborhoods.
These actions are simply to impose terror, to impose fear, from these state structures to avoid the success of popular demonstrations through terror, like the ones yesterday, which were extraordinary throughout the country.
Most of the 14 fatal victims were murdered in the most distant areas from the cities and through ambush raids from the military police and organizations created by the current government of Juan Orlando Hernández.
In Argentina, a march was held in support of the opposition and former President Cristina Fernández, who was sentenced and dismissed from Congress without proof. More details in the next report.
Social and human rights organizations marched to the Plaza de Mayo to protest against the persecution of the opposition and for the freedom of all political prisoners. It coincided with the resistance march organized every year by the mothers of Plaza de Mayo.
We have to take the streets like our comrades did with Perón. We have to fight and not allow them to jail Cristina, because then they'll come for all of us.
This is persecution of political leaders, and of union leaders too, because they are also persecuting the unions that don't think like this government does. That's why I believe we have to be on the streets. We have to keep fighting. The resistance march starts here, this afternoon, but I think it shouldn't end until this government doesn't have anyone left who doesn't represent the interest of the Argentinian people.
Reactions came quickly after the request for the detention and dismissal for treason of the current Senator Cristina Fernández and other members of her government.
Without any proof, they are trying to turn a decision of the Congress into a judicial order, which is unheard of. Bonadillo is a very efficient figure for the Macri government. That's why his court is called the embassy. We know who he gets his orders from and what he is doing to execute them, precisely to divert attention and to persecute the leaders who are trying to oppose the adjustment policies of this neoliberal government.
Judge Claudio Bonadio requested the preventive imprisonment and the lifting of the immunity of Cristina Fernández in connection with the investigation into the alleged protection of the Iranians accused of attacking the Jewish Community Center in 1994. The former Foreign Minister Héctor Timerman, the former Legal Secretary Carlos Zanini, and the social leader Luis D'Elia were also detained.
This is clearly a violation of the rule of law. I think they're playing with fire. It seems like they want to provoke our people into violence, so they can have an excuse to repress them. They're reaching a very dangerous point, in my opinion. In the words of Monsignor Romero, the murdered Archbishop from El Salvador, repression should end. We also expressed our concern, hoping this will not end in bloodshed.
Hundreds of voices are being raised to demand to be able to live in democracy and for an end to this harassment of those who think differently from the government of Mauricio Macri. They also reject the mainstream media coverage and say they will continue with this struggle for truth, memory, and justice.
Also in Argentina, social leader Milagro Sala was acquitted of all charges after a 3-year trial. Our correspondent Sabrina Roth has more details in the next report.
Finally, the second legal process against Milagro Sala has come to an end. She was accused of threatening 2 policemen over the phone in 2014. At the oral court number 2, Judges Antonio Yeramos, Luis Ernesto Camada, and Mario Ramón Puig decided to absolve Milagro Sala of all crimes due to the lack of merit in the submitted evidence and the strong arguments the social leader's defense presented during the last leg of the trial. It's important to highlight that Gerardo Gastón Morales, son of the current governor Gerardo Morales, became a plaintiff attorney 10 months after the alleged facts and in the middle of his father's 2015 electoral campaign. Milagro Sala's defense described this trial as a legal sham and explained that this trial would have never happened if the names of the social leader and the governor wouldn't have been involved. Milagro still remains at Alto Comedero prison and it's waiting for the Supreme Justice Court of Jujuy to set her free.
Sabrina Roth from Argentina. Although Peru is one of the richest sea coasts in the world, official sources state that 70% of the fish that people consume is imported. Why does this happen and who does this benefit? We'll tell you more in the next report.
Along the Peruvian shore, more than 60,000 fishermen provide the market with fish for human consumption, according to the Ministry of Production. But this same institution declared that only 3 out of every 10 fish conserves are produced in Peru.
We have the best fish in Peru. I don't know why we need to import anything. We have all the raw material.
People come from other countries, they take our goods, and then they sell them back to us.
According to the Fishing Federation, this happens due to President Kuczynski's neoliberal politics, which allow transnationals to fish 2.8 million tons of Peruvian anchoveta, while independent Peruvian fishermen can only fish a tenth of that figure through the whole year.
Supreme decrees are given, which favor a few companies by allowing them to produce nothing but fish flour. They don't care about independent companies and what they can do for our internal market. This has been extremely prejudicial to the market.
In this way, independent fish conserve factories have seen the raw material raided. In Ancash region, for example, independent companies had to let go over 60,000 employees, according to the Unions Guild.
Unfortunately, in our country, we always put the big corporations in front of small businesses or independent companies, even if the latter can become investments that will feed the population and can lead to a national conserves company which will benefit everyone.
Policies of trade liberalization are another factor that negatively influence this sector. Small fish conserve companies tell us that they have to compete with imported products which are subsidized in their countries of origin and which are allowed to enter Peru paying almost 0 taxes.
Now moving to Brazil, where the House of Representatives says it won't vote on the pension reform until mid-December, after reaching an agreement with President Michel Temer, as he didn't have enough votes to pass the new bill. According to House of Representatives President Rodrigo Maia, voting will take place on December 18th. Meanwhile, thousands of protesters have taken to the streets to reject this reform that is looking to raise the working age to 40 years of contributions in order to get pension benefits. The former Brazilian president Lula da Silva is continuing on his 3rd leg of his caravan through Brazil. Telesur has been following him closely on this journey, and in this is a special report, our correspondent André Vieira and Sebastián Soto look at the plight of 13 million unemployed in Brazil, one of the consequences of the neoliberal policies of Michel Temer and his allies. Let's take a look.
Lula da Silva has just started his 4th day in Itaboraí with an act in the petrochemical facilities of Rio de Janeiro, a place that has just employed more than 38,000 workers, and it now remains closed. A fact that intensifies much more the situation in Rio de Janeiro, where there are more than 1.3 million unemployed, in a country where around 13 million jobless people live. Jorge da Silva, an unemployed steelworker, blames the de facto government of Michel Temer for his situation.
Since there's been that government transition, and the PMDB and PSDB parties hold office, We have been losing our jobs.
In the city of Mague, which is also in the metropolitan region, a similar situation has been noticed. Luciene, who left the northeastern region of Brazil in search of a better life, remains unemployed.
With President Temer, everything is just more difficult. It's so tough to get anything at all. Because my son is on a wheelchair and needs crutches to mobilize his situation, it's very complicated right now. Brazil is broke, and it is all because of the president who ruined it.
In the city of Duque de Caxias, we've met the Feijó family. Murillo's unemployment coincides with the beginning of Temer's presidency.
I was a painter back then, until things started to change. Then everything changed. Now it's so hard to find a job.
Besides unemployment, the Feijó family are one of the more than 1 million families that were removed from the Family Financial Aid Program.
The situation is very bad. With Lula was actually much better because I was in the Family Financial Aid Program. And now I don't get anything anymore. They took that away from me.
Lula's day ended with an act that was dedicated to thousands of people who demanded change for this serious situation that Rio de Janeiro and Brazil are suffering.
The people in this caravan are here to emphasize that in 2018 we are going to overcome this. We are going to fight the unemployment crisis with the return of Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva.
Lula da Silva has promised that if he returns to the presidency, he will state new public policies in order to create employment, and he will make a popular referendum to withdraw the neoliberal policies that affect the working class here in Brazil.
We'll be back very soon. Stay with us. Across the Arab and Muslim worlds, thousands of demonstrators took to the streets on the Muslim holy day to express solidarity with the people of Palestine. In Egypt, hundreds of Muslims in the capital, Cairo, protested against U.S. President Donald Trump's recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital. Protesters burned the U.S. and Israeli flags after praying in the Al-Azhar Mosque. The demonstrators chanted slogans saying Jerusalem belongs to Arabs. In Jordan, a huge demonstration took place outside the U.S. Embassy in Amman to condemn Trump's decision. Around 300 Jordanians gathered near the U.S. Embassy, braving the heavy police presence. Demonstrators chanted pro-Palestinian slogans and held up Palestinian flags. A major segment of Jordan's population is of Palestinian origin and susceptible to any political settlement with Israel. Jordan lost East Jerusalem and the West Bank to Israel during the 1967 Arab-Israeli War. The protests and unrest spread to Syria, where Palestinian refugees in Damascus are also demonstrating in reaction to the announcement. Palestinians and Syrians living in the Syrian camp burned U.S. and Israeli flags and chanted slogans as they protested, expressing their solidarity with Palestine. In Yemen, too, tens of thousands of people marched in the streets of Sana'a, beside the ancient walled city, in a protest organized by the dominant Houthi movement in response to the decision by the U.S. to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. In Palestine itself, large numbers protested across the occupied territories. Israel troops killed at least 2 Palestinians and wounded many more. Our correspondent Nur Harasin sends us this report from the border of Gaza and Israel.
The situation is escalating here in the Gaza Strip since this morning, and there were many protests in the buffer zone in the border, close to the border between Gaza and Israel. Many injuries arrived to the hospitals in Gaza. The hospitals here have declared the status of emergency as the number of casualties is going higher. The number until now is 400 injuries and 2 people killed in Gaza. One of them is a 25-year-old young man, and the other man is a 50-year-old man. Just a few minutes ago, we were hearing the Israeli tanks and the Israeli warplanes targeting places and farms and homes in northern Gaza. According to the Palestinian Health Ministry, in this latest Israeli attack on the northern Gaza Strip, many injuries has arrived to the hospitals, around 25 injuries. Some of them are kids and women.
Noor Harasin from Gaza. The UN Security Council held a special session in reaction to Trump's decision, with all nations putting forward statements calling the move a direct violation of UN resolutions. The Palestinian representative called for the UN Security Council to act, calling on people to stand and defend Palestinian lands.
The occupied territory of the State of Palestine, encompassing the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip, is an established legal and political fact. No policy announcement can change that reality, nor can it negate the rights of the Palestinian people as per international law and the relevant UN resolutions. Mr. President, the Security Council must reaffirm its clear position on Jerusalem's status and affirm its rejection of all violations by whomever and whenever. Security Council resolutions remain fully valid and must be implemented. These resolutions are the key to peace.
Our correspondent Karina Cartagena is at the United Nations and has this report.
Hello, greetings from New York. In this emergency meeting of the United Nations, most of the members of the Security Council considered the announcement by President Donald Trump that the United States would officially recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel dangerous and against international law and the resolutions of the UN. The United States justified its decision and said that they will not accept any attack against Israel in the United Nations. Palestine rejected the decision of the United States for not having legal validity and requested its revocation, while Israel considers important the decision of the United States and pointed out that there will be no peace if Jerusalem is not its capital. The United Nations reject the unilateral decision of the United States and clarified that these actions will increase the violence between Israel and Palestine. In the wake of the announcement by the United States, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres stressed that there is no alternative to the two-state solution and that Jerusalem is an issue that must be resolved through direct negotiations between the parties.
Karina Cartagena from the United Nations. 14 United Nations peacekeepers from Tanzania have been killed and more than 40 wounded in an attack in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. 5 soldiers with the DR Congo's armed forces were also killed. The attack occurred in Congo's North Kivu province, which has remained a hotbed for armed militias who continue to battle for control over the mineral-rich countryside. And Mexico is celebrating the birthday of one of its most famous muralists, Diego Rivera. Through his work, the painter built the country's identity as he portrayed the fight of its people to free themselves from colonialism and oppression. Alongside artists David Alfaro Siqueiros and José Clemente Orozco, Rivera founded the Painters Union and the Mexican Muralist movement. His work also gathers more than 3,000 paintings, drawings, and illustrations, as well as rich written legacy. And we've come to the end of this evening news brief. This and many other news, you can find them on our website at telesurtv.net/English. And also join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Carla Gonzalez. Thank you for watching.